All right, I'm recording. Um, Hello, everyone. Today I'm debating an anarcho-capitalist YouTuber, if I'm not mistaken. If you want to introduce yourself, tell everyone what you believe. Go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Kieran here. Um, I am I would say, anarcho-capitalist, free market anarchist, like Walter Block's School of Economics type of Ancap. I've been following the philosophy, I would say, since 2017, and I've gotten into a lot of philosophers of that mindset. But I'm always constantly educating myself on different people's viewpoints so I could better educate myself in the philosophy of libertarian minded people.
Okay, I guess that's gonna be our main disagreement. You're an anarcho-capitalist. I'm obviously a socialist. Um, I know we kind of agreed to not have like a sort of strict format. If you want to, I guess, go first and tell me why you would disagree with my positions and how you would justify your belief in anarcho capitalism. If you want to do that, go ahead.
Um, yeah, the reason why I'm a anarcho-capitalist is just simply because I believe in freedom. I believe in the life, liberty, and property of individuals, and I believe that you should be free to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt nobody. The main issue that I just simply have with socialist thinkers is just mainly that the violence that most radicals would believe in,
Hmm.
um, like despite some of them trying to make it look peaceful, that's really like the only issue I have with it. I don't mind a bunch of peaceful socialists getting together with their buddies to create some sort of commune. That's awesome. Do what you got to do, just don't force it onto other people. And at the end of the day, if it is successful, then maybe that could be like the worldview that people should follow. But I just think like using violence onto innocent people just to force that idea to other people just doesn't fly with me. And I think that type of mindset gets a lot of people hurt at the end of the day.
Hmm. Okay, it seems to be that your main argument is that you believe in anarcho capitalism because you believe in freedom, and you oppose socialism because you think socialism necessitates violence and force. Um, so I guess I would to sort of kick this off, I would sort of disagree with both of these points. In terms of freedom, I agree that freedom is certainly important. But I also think that if we want to truly maximize people's freedom, because, well, what is freedom really? Freedom is just sort of the ability to live one's life as one wants without hindrance or constraint. And with that definition, which I think is fundamentally the definition of freedom that most people care about and care about achieving for themselves, I would say that it's pretty important in terms of people to be able to live their lives as they want, to ensure that people have certain basic necessities, like things like healthcare, things like a living wage, these sorts of sort of social insurances, and so on. In terms of violence and force, I agree with you, of course, that violence is something that is bad. However, when we have situations where, like, say, children are starving, people are dying because they can't afford insulin because of the private healthcare industry, people are going without any money because market income distributions don't distribute them any resources. I would consider these sorts of situations fundamentally to be violence. And in order to alleviate this, I think you're going to need some sort of like coercive element like the state. Fundamentally, obviously, in a perfect world, nobody would need to be coerced to do anything. However, I think we sort of have to balance out which negative incomes we would less like to see, and I would less like to see millions of children starving than I would just taxing like someone like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or something, which would of course involve some level of coercion. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah. So basically, you still support the state. You're not no anarcho-communist, right?
Hmm.
Oh, okay. So basically, in your worldview, you think that everything should be massively nationalized and hyper regulated, if that's how I'm thinking of it to be, right?
I think that certain industries should be nationalized. Like, I think healthcare should be nationalized. I think certain industries would work well with a market, but I think in the industries where we leave the market, I would still have the government exercise some degree of control over these industries through by buying up stocks and competing companies through a social wealth fund. So, like the broad strokes of the socialism that I advocate for is nationalizing certain industries, having the government control industries where we have a market through a social wealth fund, and then, of course, having like large sectoral unions and co-determination policies, and then high taxes and a lot of welfare. Um, that's sort of like the broad strokes of what I advocate for.
Okay. So there's still a competitive labor force that's gonna, make up for those, derivatives that could be lost or gained within that market.
What do you mean by that?
So like, who's gonna be the productive workers in that? I guess like socialist, I guess like market workplace. So like, if I want to become you know, let's just say I want to become a mechanical engineer, and I'm working under a socialist style market. How would that work for people that work like high income jobs?
If so, like if you want a job, how would you? I mean, it would pretty much just be the same as it is right now, right? Like if you want a certain job, if it requires some degree of specialization, you go to college to earn a degree so you can like have some sort of qualification that helps you get that job. Um,
Yeah,
it's just it would be the fundamentally the same process for finding a job as people go through now.
yeah. But this is true. Like the workers, unions or there's no like state enforced program that everybody has to go through in order to get there.
In order to get a job.
Yeah, because like you're saying that you want to nationalize certain markets, so I would
Hmm.
assume that the state has to come in and make sure everyone's like licensed under
Oh
some
yeah,
like
yeah,
some
sure.
sort of institution. Yeah,
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in the same way that like I mean, it's just how like teachers work now, right? Um, like the government like hires teachers directly to like perform the job. Obviously, yeah, it would just be like that.
data.
Or how like doctors are hired by the government in like countries with single payer healthcare, for example.
Okay, but let's just say if that wasn't to work, like what would be like the backup plan?
If what wasn't to work.
Like if that type of model like wasn't like effective in helping people out, like how would that I guess like recover, if it were to fail. Like, let's just say if that idea, wasn't to work, would there be some sort of like backup plan
If the
to do that?
I, I, I guess I'm not quite sure what you mean because I mean like the government already hires people. Like it's not like it doesn't work. Like it's I mean I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Like, I mean, in several industries across the world, the government hires people to do certain jobs. It's not a
Yeah.
particularly like complicated process. It happens all the time. It's pretty easy. So I
Yeah.
don't know what you would mean by if it didn't work, I guess.
Oh well, the reason why I say that is because of the government's not a business. It's still a monopoly. So there's going to be like losses and gains made out of that particular that would probably have some form of shortages out of that particular department. So that's why that I asked that question.
You're saying that the government hiring people would create shortages of labor in those industries?
No, there would be certain factors out of those particular departments where they can't they can't reallocate the resources efficiently because everything has to be centrally planned in order to do it. I would assume, right?
In certain industries, sure. There's
Yeah.
some degree of
So
planning, of course, yeah. Like the National
so
Health Service is largely an example of like planning.
yeah. So for stuff like that, not everything's going to be allocated properly for the resources. So there's going to be massive losses and gains that the state would have to be responsible for if there was like massive failures coming out of it.
Well, sure, but that almost seems like sort of like question begging. Like you're saying, like if there were massive losses as a result of the government running an industry, the government would be responsible for it. Well, it's like, yeah, of course, but I don't see any reason to think that there would be these like massive losses in certain like nationalized industries, compared to compared to like private industries. Like I mean, if we want to look at like certain industries, like healthcare, for example, in countries where the healthcare industry is nationalized, right, we tend to see much better results in terms of like pretty much every metric, as opposed to countries where the healthcare is run by like the private sector, because the private sector like tends not to be like market incentives don't work very well for healthcare, because of like bad feedback mechanisms, asymmetrical information, things like that. So yeah.
Well, I mean, today's market economy is not a deregulated pure free market economy. Like most economies in the world are like basically mixed economies, right?
Yeah, sure. But what I would say is that while it's true that because this is like something people often say is like, well, the reason like healthcare is so expensive is because of like government regulation, and that's the reason why it doesn't work well. But I think that even maybe it's true that certain regulations make it so that healthcare prices are higher than they would be in a free market. But I think it's nonetheless the case that there are certain just inherent features of the healthcare industry that make it so that it essentially could never be handled as well by a free market. So, like, for example, one of the main drivers of healthcare costs in the US isn't regulation, but administrative costs. And one of the biggest reasons that administrative costs are so high is because, like, hospitals have to deal with different insurance companies. So, like, different insurance companies all have different rules in terms of like the process for like how to file a claim and how to pay providers and so on. And like every healthcare provider having to sort of juggle all of these different insurance companies with different requirements and processes creates like a massively larger a level of administrative complexity than would exist if everybody was just on the same healthcare plan with the same rules and so on. Um, Another factor in like the healthcare industry would be just the fact that like one reason why markets could work in something like food or like apples is because if you bite into an apple and the apple's rotten, you can immediately say, okay, the quality of this apple is bad, so I'm not going to buy from this market again. And that's how in a sort of market for apples, prices are adjusted and quality is adjusted in a sort of efficient way. However, in healthcare, it's not exactly as easy to say assess the quality of like a liver surgery you just received or something like that. This is what's called like asymmetrical information, and it's part of the reason why like market feedback mechanisms don't really work in healthcare. So like I do agree that some of the problems in private healthcare systems like the U.S. do come from regulation, but there are just certain inherent problems with having the market do healthcare in any situation that wouldn't be solved unless we did some sort of like a government-run healthcare system.
Okay. Well, I mean, the issue that I have with government-run healthcare system is just like the quality of it and the people that have like massive problems that do need to be taken care of that won't be, I guess, honored by the state because the issue is just simply like meeting the supply and demand. And the examples that I don't know if it's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. With government healthcare being inefficient, would probably be like the British National Healthcare Service, where people have to like wait, extremely long to get like treatments for like particular operations or services, and it's not sustainable to the point where everyone's like chipping in for like their particular healthcare that they want, and if that's not being met with everyone's needs and wants, then I kind of fear that's going to cause like a lot of issues for people that are suffering.
Okay, so it seems like your main issue with single payer healthcare is that you say it doesn't meet people's needs because the fact that everybody's there's so much demand means that there's going to be like higher wait times, so people don't have certain needs met. I do think it's true that certain places like the UK do in general have higher wait times as opposed to like a lot of private insurers in like the US. However, if you compare the amount of people who die due to like higher wait times in, say, the United Kingdom, and compare that to the amount of people who die as a result of just not having health insurance at all in, like, the US, like, the numbers aren't even close. So it seems like the higher wait times are, like, sure, you can say that it's not pleasant, but it's a lot better than just a lot of people dying because they don't have health care at all, if that makes sense.
Um, I think I sort of understand what you're saying. I just think like if I'm in a dire situation where I'm in like a life or death situation where I need to go to the hospital and I need to be taken care of, I think from that angle, I want to make sure that I get to the hospital and I get taken care of, and then I can focus on paying off like my bills, later. Because at least if like my life is being saved, then that's all that I care about, and then I could focus on paying off like my bill later.
Well, yeah,
Because
I
I
mean,
think
people
yeah
aren't being like people aren't being like turned away from emergency rooms in the United Kingdom. Like this isn't really a problem. Like what when people mean when they say wait times is generally it's not like I was shot and the hospital turned me away. It's just like, like I want this surgery and it's taking me like a few months to get a certain like surgery, like a knee replacement surgery or something like that.
yeah
But the
because
situation that you're describing where like it's a life or death situation and you don't want to have to wait to get care, like that isn't actually like the issue. That isn't an
yeah
issue in like the United Kingdom or any other single payer healthcare systems.
yeah yeah like honestly I just just don't want to be in that type of situation where if that wait time were to be like super duper long for you to just get like a knee surgery or open heart surgery, it's just like I rather kind of like put my money where the provider is, just to get it done right away, because I want to make sure that my body is taken care of, and
But
I'm getting like the best money paid for like the right operation.
but the problem is like maybe that sort of line of thinking works if you have enough money to pay for healthcare. But the
Yeah,
problem is like a lot of people don't have the money to pay for healthcare. So having a
yeah,
system where if you want like a knee surgery replacement, but it'll take a few more months, as opposed to a system where if you have the money, you can get it sooner, but also millions of people don't have the money, and so tens of thousands of people die every year because they can't afford the what they need. I would take the former system over the latter because it results in a incredibly lower amount of overall human suffering.
yeah. Well, I don't know if this might be a good idea, but there's like this collective like healthcare plan that's in America. I don't know if it might work in your type of idea. I think it's called MetaShare. Have you heard of it?
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, well, I heard about it. I think like a couple years back, and basically it's just like it's like I want to say almost similar to a single player, but it's more in like a market, type version. But basically, like you have like a certain group of people chip in,
Hmm.
together, and then all that money gets paid for like your bills, doctor visits, or any medical operations that you need to get done. And I think maybe that could be something that could be, you know, like maybe put in place for people to get into. So maybe that way, like let's just say if you want to have like the state involved to do something like that, you could have like mega corporations come together and like have like all the tax money funded in that type of sense. So that way you could be covered for like everything. So that way you can go to the doctor, get checked up, and you can have all your operations done on time.
I'm not exactly sure you're describing. So you're saying like private healthcare companies administer healthcare, but the government like gives people subsidies so that they can pay for it.
Yeah, yeah, everything is subsidized like through the corporations, but it would be paid for, by the state to, get the free healthcare that you want.
Well, I mean, the reason that people generally complain about wait times, or the thing that sort of people say results in higher wait times, is just simply the fact that more people are receiving health care, right? So there's more demand that the supply of doctors has to deal with.
Yeah.
So it feels like the only way to do away with the wait times that you are concerned about is to have a system wherein a lot of people are prevented access to healthcare. And sort of without that element, I don't think you can achieve the sort of wait times that you want. If you want like lower wait times, I mean, in like a single payer system, I mean, you can do that through a variety of ways. I mean, you can just increase funding for the government run healthcare system to make it work quicker, more efficiently. You can like eliminate certain like occupational licensing and like the medical industry, so like there can be a higher supply of doctors. One solution that I've heard is having it so that I think primary care practitioners, I think they're called, do the work that doctors do, because currently they're not allowed to do the work that doctors do, but basically they have roughly the same qualifications to be doing that same work. So I think there's a variety of ways to sort of reduce wait times within a single payer system. But the way that you're proposing we reduce wait times is just by creating a large population of people who don't have access to healthcare, and I don't think that's an ethical way to go about doing that.
Oh no, 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 no. Well, that's not that's not what I believe in. I was just given like a possible idea that could work in your type of
Hmm.
system. But for me, I want everything to be privatized. Markets should be completely deregulated, and everything should be held, at the consumer level where everything's met with high quality products and services with a good reputation of those companies to meet the consumer demand.
Um, okay, so I guess to sort of like address like your sort of system is that I'm not exactly sure like which sort of area I want to go down, because I do think that there's a variety of problems in terms of how markets function in the context of the healthcare industry. In terms of like administrative costs are always going to be high if you have multiple different insurance companies, as opposed to if you just simplified it by putting everyone on the same plan. You have the issue of like asymmetrical information. But I guess sort of like the simplest sort of rebuttal I would give to the healthcare system that you advocate for, and I think this goes to a sort of larger problem that I see in the anarcho-capitalist philosophy or political system in general, is okay, well, what do you say to people who can't afford it, right? Because the fact is that a market income, a completely free market, distributes economic resources based on two things, and those two things are labor and capital. The problem is roughly 50% of the population doesn't earn any income through labor and doesn't obviously own any capital. So basically, we have a situation where 50% of the population isn't distributed any income by the market. And this isn't just because of like unemployment. This is largely consists of people, the non-working population largely consists of people who not only aren't working, but shouldn't be working. These are disabled people, elderly people, children, caretakers, students, etc. And so my question is, how do you, in an anarcho capitalist system, resolve the fact that about 50% of people aren't being distributed any income and then therefore wouldn't have the means to pay for things like healthcare or even food or like basic human necessities like that?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if you've heard of these mutual aid firms that existed in America. I believe they were called friendly societies. I don't know if you heard about them.
No, no. I think I know like basically what you're saying, but you can go on if you want.
Yeah, check them out if you're interested. They were mutual aid firms that were widely created nationwide, I believe, back in like the I think late 40s till the end of the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, like immigrants that came over that were struggling to make ends meet created like mutual aid fund firms to like help people out with like whatever situations that they had, whether if you like broke your leg or lost a family member, anything of that particular issue,
Mm-hmm.
that was there to help the people that were poor and needy that couldn't affording what they needed to get back on track. And I think maybe something like that could help. I'm not wanting to just have everybody just work, and then if you don't have like a job, then you know, tough luck. Like you gotta do it for like yourself. No, like I want to help people out. I want to have like my own type of charities to like give money to people that need it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
like the best way to do that is to have like those you know like those type of firms around, in case anyone is, suffering, to help those people out. Because, if I'm voting, with like my dollar, I want to make sure that I give it to that business that is there to, give it to that person, or I'll just give it to that person myself. I don't need no company telling me, where I need to put like my money into. If I want to help you out and you're suffering, then that should be my liberty to do so. If I care about you and you care about me, then I don't see how me and you can not work together to get that done.
Okay, so it seems like your solution is to the problem that I posed is sort of private, just having private charity take care of like poor people. Um, I guess the sort of reason that I'm skeptical of this is because you're right. Like, if you care about me, if you care about people, you're going to, donate a lot of your money to charity. And it would sort of resolve the problem. But the problem is, like, empirically, it just doesn't seem like people really care enough to give enough money from their personal wallets to alleviate poverty to any substantial extent. So, like, for example, there's one uh, there's a couple graphs that I always like to reference when talking about this, and this is based on OECD data, where if you look at the correlation between poverty reduction and net public social spending, you find that public social spending, in other words, like government sponsored welfare, substantially reduces poverty. The correlation is an R squared correlation of 0.64. So that's like welfare pretty substantially reduces poverty across OECD countries. But if you do the same thing, but you look at the correlation between poverty reduction and private social spending, in other words, like private charity, like what you're referencing, the correlation is an R squared correlation of zero. In other words, there seems to be literally like zero correlation between like charity, people spending their money on charity, and like substantial poverty reduction. So it seems like without a sort of like coercive government like without like coercive government intervention, it seems like enough people just don't decide to do this in order to really solve the problem. It's fundamentally like a collective action problem. Like if everybody decided to do this thing, then it would be beneficial for everyone if everyone decided to do this thing. But because it's a collective action problem, not enough people decide to do the thing in order to resolve the problem. So yeah, that's fundamentally what I would say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's like a good idea because I think that idea was good enough to help people out at the time. And actually, I believe those friendly societies were good to the point where I believe poverty went down by 3%. But I would have to get like the data and facts on that. But
Yeah,
um,
it
uh,
just seems like in general, like if you look at like a broad
yeah,
international database, it seems like private charity doesn't have any substantial impact on the rate of poverty.
yeah.
So yeah, it just seems like this isn't really like I guess it doesn't seem like this is a viable solution to the problem.
I mean, it doesn't hurt to try it out. I mean,
Well, I mean it. If we were, I would agree that it doesn't hurt to try more people donating to charity. But what you're suggesting is to replace welfare with charity, and I think that would hurt a substantial amount of people, because welfare does a very excellent job at reducing poverty, whereas it seems like private charity doesn't seem to reduce poverty much at all. So I think sort of switching this over and moving over completely to private charity and abandoning welfare would do a substantial amount of harm to the population that's in poverty or near poverty.
Yeah. Well, the way I look at it is just like if there's a will, there's a way, and I think like whatever ideas that could be better than the ideas I come up with, then I think it should be tested and tried out.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like a government style welfare system could work, but you have to look at the people that are living under it and how many people are getting away from the welfare to go back to work and start being productive, so that way there's like nobody continuing to be lazy and create like unproductive family structures, because that's really what the issue that I have against state welfare. It's the unproductive generations that keep begging for more, and they don't teach their young ones to get better, to get away from it, and live a successful life.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of in terms of so it seems like your main argument is like um you know I guess I'll just run through like a few different things you said. So you said, for one, like you said, if you say if there's a will, there's a way, and I agree. But the problem with private charity is that it seems like there isn't a will, which is why there isn't a way through private charity to substantially reduce poverty. You also sort of make the point that government welfare could work. You just need to see like evidence on that in terms of its ability to reduce poverty, and based on like all the research that I've done, it seems like it does like a pretty decent job. So like for example, if you look at among OECD countries, there is a very significant correlation between public social spending and poverty reduction. If you look at like within the U.S., I think the data that I'm familiar with comes from 2018, based on calculations by a guy named Matt Brunig. And basically, what he found is that if you compare the poverty rate before taking into account welfare versus the poverty rate after taking into account welfare, welfare reduces the headcount poverty rate by 46%, and it reduces the poverty gap by 66%. So like a very substantial. Additionally, if you want to look at like across OECD countries, if you look at poverty across OECD countries before taking into account welfare, the United States is in the middle, is like dead average in terms of how much poverty we have. But after taking into account welfare, because all of the other countries spend so much more on welfare than we do, we shoot to the top in terms of poverty. So based on like all the empirical evidence I've engaged with, it does seem that welfare is very good at eliminating poverty. This seems to be like what all the evidence points to. In terms of your argument that government welfare might create a class of lazy people, I've done a lot of research on this. I have a few sources that I would recommend to you that I can send you links to. One program or one study that I would reference is a comprehensive program by program study on different welfare policies titled An Assessment of the Effectiveness of Anti-Poverty Programs in the United States. And in this study, researchers Ben Shalom, Robert Moffat, and John Schultz found that the supposed work disincentive effects of welfare have quote unquote basically zero, according to the author's, effect on the overall poverty rate. Another thing that I would reference is, according to data from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, over 9/10 of entitlement benefits spending goes to either elderly, disabled, or working households. So the amount of people who are just like on welfare and not working seems to be like very, very, very small. And I agree that it's good to have people be more productive. But I think that I think there's substantial evidence that welfare actually makes people more productive. So, like, for example, the economist Gareth Olds has done a lot of good studies. For example, let's study food stamp entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in the social safety net. And basically, what he's found is that welfare programs can be shown to increase the level of entrepreneurship because it provides people more money that they can save for investment, and it gives people more economic security, so they're more willing to engage in risky activities. And the final thing that I would reference was a 2019 paper titled Innovation and Welfare: The Marriage of an Unlikely Couple. And basically, what this study found is that social spending positively correlates to innovation, because when people are more financially better off, they have what the authors called more rich mood action repertoires, and were more suited for like innovation. So it seems like, based on all of the research that I've engaged with, welfare, I agree that it's important that people are productive, and it seems like welfare doesn't disincentivize productivity to any degree. And on the contrary, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that welfare actually makes people more productive in terms of like innovation and business startups and so on.
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, as far as just like what I mean about unproductive people, like if we like look at people in, let's just say, black families, black American families, most of those families are like single motherhood families, and a lot of them take a lot of welfare for the sake of using their children as a means of welfare, and not actually like uplifting themselves back up from it. And the issue that I have against it is just simply that, if those type of families are being breaded, what would be the solution to restrict that type of behavior to be imported into another family generation?
Okay, so are you um okay, so sorry, I'm just trying to remember everything you said. So it seems like you're making a couple different arguments. So it seems like, one, you're making the argument that welfare like sort of creates a lot of people who are just taking the welfare because they're like welfare queens, and aren't really like wanting to be productive. And the other claim seems to be that welfare is increasing, or in some way incentivizes single motherhood. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in certain sectors, like for Black American families, like 73% of Black children don't have a father,
Mm-hmm.
and when that's out of the picture, the mother is now the new father to the child, which makes it completely harder for the child to come up in like a good family environment. And most of those families are like very disoriented because a lot of what the women in those communities are taking advantage of the government welfare and using their children as a means of getting more welfare money. So that the more children they have, the more money they get. So they take advantage of that and try to use like other men as like a tool to take advantage of their children, to use it as like a means of not wanting to work anymore.
Okay.
Which,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, all right. So, I guess, again, I've done quite a bit of research on this question, because I know this is said a lot that like welfare increases the rate of single motherhood. So, first of all, with regards to whether or not women are intentionally having kids specifically to earn the welfare benefits, well, this wouldn't really make sense, because given like the welfare benefits that we have for children in the United States, even with the tax credits that we give, people are women are always going to be poorer with children than without children. So, like, there's one statistic in a paper that I can send you that basically found that if there were no children, the rate of poverty would be half of what it is among adults. And so basically what that goes to show is, like, even with our existing programs, if you have a child, you are going to be massively poorer than if you didn't have a child, because like the tax credit system that we have to provide additional income to people with children, doesn't fully compensate for the drain on resources that children represent in terms of how much it costs to take care of them. Additionally, the child benefits that we have in the United States are tax credit systems, earned income tax credit, child tax credit, additional child tax credit, and these tax credit systems are trapezoidally designed. So, in other words, if you're not earning any income, you don't get any benefits from these tax credit systems. And if you're earning only a little bit of income, you get like very much less than the maximum possible amount. And so, in order to even receive child benefits in the United States, like these tax credits, you need to be working in order to receive them. These tax credits basically have a work requirement. So, a woman deciding I'm just going to have children so that I can get money without having to work. Well, that wouldn't even work because our systems mandate that you
Yeah,
work in order to receive them. But I guess in terms of the broader claim that welfare is increasing single motherhood, I don't think that I don't think that this is like super empirically borne out. So like originally, so what you're referencing is that people thought this because there seemed to be a correlation between more generous welfare available to single mothers and higher rates of single motherhood. However, in a study titled "Welfare Effects on Female Headship with Area Effects," Robert Moffitt found that when controlling for confounding factors, the relationship between welfare and single motherhood disappears for white people, but remains for black people. And then in a study, in a follow-up study titled "Does Welfare Play Any Role in Female Headship Decisions?", researcher Hilary Hoynes found that the impact of welfare on black single motherhood disappears as well when controlling for migration, which suggests that welfare generosity does not cause single motherhood in black communities, but people are more likely to become single mothers. People who are more likely to become single mothers move to states with better benefits. And then finally, the one more thing I would recommend, or I would suggest, is that in another study titled "Welfare in America: Is Welfare the Answer or the Problem?", researchers Summers and David Elwood showed that welfare benefits could not play a major role in the rise of out-of-wedlock births because benefits rose significantly in the 1960s, only to fall in the 70s and 80s, which is when out-of-wedlock births rose most sharply. The major reason for this is that like when people originally pointed to the correlation between more generous welfare benefits for single mother and higher single motherhoods, is that this correlation failed to take into account like the fact that doesn't necessarily imply a causal relationship, but could rather just be spurious, since areas with more single mothers are more likely to pass more generous benefits available to single mothers, and areas which have cultures that are more accepting of single motherhood are more likely to pass more generous benefits for single mothers. So yeah, I know that was a lot, but I've done a lot of research on this because I've heard this sort of talking point from a lot of conservatives, I guess.
yeah. Say what you gotta say. I mean, it's really good that you bring the facts versus people talking out of like emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But
I can,
yeah,
by the way, if you want to like look over any of this, because I know like, of course, I wouldn't expect you to like look over the studies I send you like during a debate. So I can send you any of this if you want to like look it over later and maybe
yeah,
like
sure.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I'm more than willing to look at what you have researched.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, like the only biggest concern that I really have out of welfare generational families is also like the youth being criminally influenced to not be productive, because if you even look at Black American neighborhoods, a lot of younger children, especially with younger boys, usually end up becoming criminals, by their early teenage years, as young as 13, if not 14. And the issue being is that when there's like no, I guess, like incentive for them to like go out and be productive, it causes a massive divide in intellectual like productivity, I would say, for them to like not be influenced to go out and be successful, and then they just continue doing like the same thing, what I guess certain women would do to take advantage of what the welfare benefits, even though that they still have to work and that case to keep their benefits, right? To sustain their I guess benefit packages, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, it's just really like the criminal element that would be bred between like the younger children that are not getting better from it
Yeah.
at the end of
Okay.
the day.
Yeah. So it seems like your main argument is that so sort of like welfare encourages people to be less productive, and then people who are encouraged to be less productive are like more criminal, I guess. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, if families are not getting any better from it, then those younger children in that given generation will, replicate like the same issues of what the previous family generation had done.
Yeah. So you're sort of saying that like welfare makes the children of parents less productive, and then sort of as a result of that, um, the children learn from that and they become less productive, which like increases crime rates. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay. So
yeah,
I guess like my retort to that would just be that like based on like some of the data I provided earlier, for example, the paper titled "An Assessment of the Effectiveness of Anti-Poverty Programs in the United States," based on like sort of assessing the behavioral impacts, it seems like there actually isn't much effect or negative impact of welfare on like how productive people are. And this can also be borne out by just looking at the fact that like the vast majority of welfare benefits go to either working households or like people who can't be working. I guess I just and then like similarly like studies in like places like Canada and Finland and even Alaska, all of these places have like certain like unconditional cash transfer programs, like sort of like a UBI type system. And basically every study that I've seen, again, I can send you any of these that you would like. Basically every study that I've seen found that these unconditional cash transfer programs didn't actually decrease labor force participation to any statistically noticeable degree. And to the extent that people were working less, it was because they were going to like college or like looking after their kids at home. Yeah, I guess I'm just skeptical of the premise that, based on all the research I've engaged with, I don't accept the premise that welfare makes people less productive. And then in terms of crime, it's interesting that you bring up crime because one of the biggest, some of the biggest influences on crime are, for example, like poverty. Like I know poverty impacts crime to a very substantial degree or increases crime to a very substantial degree. Income inequality also decreases or increases crime to a very substantial degree. And both of these problems of poverty and inequality are problems that seem to me to be both addressed by government welfare. So it seems like if we're concerned with crime, we would be supporting these policies.
policies for what?
For like welfare that distribute more income to people,
Oh well,
to,
I
to
would,
decrease income inequality
yeah,
and poverty. Yeah.
I would like for me personally, I would like for that welfare assistance to be handled by competitive mutual aid market firms. But I mean, just as far as like the criminal element behind it, that's really just like my biggest problem that I have with it because if you look at cities in America that are heavily impoverished, today, most of those backgrounds are coming from families that have single motherhood like backgrounds, especially with like young black children,
Hmm.
I would assume.
Yeah.
But
So oh, sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were finished.
yeah, yeah, like I'm just saying that it doesn't stop somebody that does have what the talents to make it out of there alive with a good successful education and like whatever is needed for them to get away from that you know lifestyle. But if the children aren't being incentivized to go out and do something to be productive because like their families are teaching them to be you know unproductive people, then I would I would assume that that would just keep replicating until that new generation comes in to get rid of that, bad mindset.
Okay, so um, I guess I've sort of touched on all of these points previously, but I guess just to sort of like reiterate, I would say that in terms of whether or not welfare should be done by like competitive mutual aid companies, well, basically when you're talking about like private mutual aid doing welfare, we're just talking about like private charity. And my concern with that is that it seems like because it's a collective action problem, the statistics bear out that private charity doesn't really doesn't really seem to be a substantial positive. It doesn't seem to have a substantial positive influence on poverty. You talked about how like most people who are violent seem to come from single motherhood families, but again, I can send you this. I guess we can sort of move on from this point because obviously I
Yeah,
disagree
yeah,
based on the
yeah,
research, and I wouldn't expect you to be able to look over the research like on command. But yeah, so like my
yeah.
problem with that is I just reject the premise that welfare it does actually incentivize or increase single motherhood based on the data that I presented. And then in terms of families teaching kids to be unproductive, similar to my last point, I would just say I reject that premise based on the research that I previously presented, which seems to suggest that welfare doesn't actually decrease productivity or decrease labor force participation, whether it's unconditional cash transfers or basically however you want to design it. It seems to be like all the studies I've seen is that there's almost no negative impact there. I
Yeah.
guess since we've been over like both of these points, if you want to move on to maybe a different point, or if you just want to like wrap things up since we've been talking for an hour, whatever you want to do.
I guess I'll come up with like a troll question for you. Do, do you do you believe that you will have the space luxurious communism in the coming future?
Um, I don't know. It's possible. Honestly, it's. I don't think it's currently technologically feasible to have like a post-scarcity communist economy. I think at some point in the future it would become possible. It just depends on how long the human race would be able to keep ourselves afloat.
Yeah. And if let's just say if anarcho capitalism were to work and it was to be viable, would you become one?
If if it were empirically shown that anarcho-capitalism led to desirable outcomes like reductions in poverty, reductions in like inequality, increases in freedom, like if these things were to be empirically shown that anarcho-capitalism fulfills the things that I care about, then yeah, of course, yeah, I mean, I would, any system or policy that was empirically shown to lead to good outcomes, I would support. Yeah, of course.
Sweet. Yeah, well, I think that's it. Like I had
Okay.
like a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to shill your channel or like tell us what your channel is called?
Uh I used to have a YouTube channel, but I got rid of that.
Oh,
Um I mean, if you guys are like into video games and sports, subscribe to my YouTube channel at krod7435. I'll just DM you, like my link for it.
okay.
And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for coming through. I had a really good talk with you, and you're probably like one of the more um, well-educated people that I've debated in quite a while.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
No problem, man.
All right. Yeah, thanks for chatting. I always appreciate it.
Yeah,
Take care.
um, I'm always down to do it again.
Yeah, sure.
All right,
Have a good night.
thank you very much. Yep, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That was fun. All right. And obligatory end of video shout out to my $10 patrons. That being Alex, Daniel, Benny, Isocratic, Liam the Commie, Hate Corruption, CEO of Market Socialism, and Zero. I appreciate the support. If any of you who are watching are interested in supporting me, and interested in seeing, I guess, like more content that I make, that's I guess like exclusive or whatever, go to subscribe to my Patreon if you're interested. I'll link it in the description. Um, Shit, am I forgetting? Oh yeah, also, if you're interested, you can join my Discord. That'll also link. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for watching, everyone.